My name is Ted Wright. I'm the grandson of Jenny Wright. My Tlingit name is Hagungach. I can't say that right because my mouth is dry, but it's been given to me by Jim Walton, and it's supposed to be translated as the wolf that howls. But when he told me about it, he said the wolf that screams. And I'm not sure what the difference is, but as I was younger, I was more radical, and so I think maybe it has something to do with my complaining about lots of things over the years. Anyway, it's good to be here. I'm going to talk about place-based education. I have a few slides. It's not very long, but I think it's going to be a little bit different than what's been talked about before, so hopefully not redundant. The first slide, of course, is in anticipation of the wondrous event that we're about to have occur once again, and hopefully someone will send me some eggs because I'll be gone on Saturday, and I thought I'd be here just in time, but apparently not. Anyway, this photo is one of my favorites, so I thought I'd just shoot it in here. I think it's self-evident what that is, right? You never know. I got into place-based education and this whole area of connecting learning to the places we live and the people who we are a number of years ago, but have really begun to focus on it full time in the past year and a half. Place-based education comes from a lot of years of ecological and environmental education, and it has been sort of redefined by those of us in American Indian and Alaska Native education in particular, who have done work through the years, especially the last 12 years, as a part of the Rural Systemic Initiatives funded by the National Science Foundation. And as Andy said at one point during a radio program we did a couple months ago, place-based education is a state of mind and not necessarily this academic subject that we study. It's a different way of looking at the world. It's the way we like to look at it. I actually learned a little bit from some ecological and environmental educators. I don't know how many of you have read any Wes Jackson? Okay, well, he's fairly obscure, but he wrote a book called Becoming Native to This Place, and he runs, or used to run, a place called the Lands Institute, sort of the opposite of what you would establish if you were establishing a place here to study where we live, which is nothing like where he lives in Kansas. Anyway, interesting book. In the book, he told of Coronado's venture into the interior of the United States, what is now the United States, and how they were looking for the lost city of gold, and how they never found, obviously, the lost city of gold, but they did document a lot of what was in the country early on, and one of the things they did was they documented the numbers of indigenous people who lived in many of the places that they went through. And later on, these kinds of evidences were used to refute what people had often said was a low number of indigenous people that lived in the United States. In other words, he ran into lots and lots and lots of tribal people from a lot of different tribal cultures. And part of the thing that was amazing about that was that they were able to sustain those populations, and so that there was food supplies that were of sufficient quantities to sustain large populations of people, and that was something that wasn't really recognized early on. Anyway, so there are roots to place-based education that we should recognize. That we didn't invent the term or the subject of study, but we're just perfecting it, I like to think. I did a little interview at the University of Washington for a job several years ago. Obviously, I didn't get the job because I work for Antioch University of Seattle. But what I did when I did this interview was I didn't start by having a PowerPoint and saying, this is what I'm going to talk about, and this is what you learn, and at the end, this is what you will have learned, and whatever, because I was supposed to do a demonstration, sort of a teaching demonstration. what I did was I started with 3 stories of animals in survival situations, and each of the stories was from the Discovery Channel, which is now all about motorcycles. But back in the day, a lot of it was about animal sorts of programming. And these 3 stories, one of them was a bear that is fighting a caribou. Has anyone seen that one? They're fighting in the river? Okay. Maybe I'm the only one that used to watch the Discovery Channel. But another one was some water buffalo, a herd of water buffalo, and some lions that were attacking one water buffalo. They had isolated it. And the water buffalo was fighting the lions off. And so this herd of water buffalo would sort of approach and then go back and approach. In other words, they wouldn't leave the one water buffalo alone. So they kept running off the lions, and the lions would keep coming back, and so eventually the water buffalo got eaten. The other was a story of an elephant who was just born, and the mother and the auntie. Has anyone seen that one? Cool. Well, gee. Was it? Yeah, it's been around. I think a few of these have been around. And so the elephant, the baby elephant, couldn't get off of its knees. It was sort of not developed enough, and so the herd of elephants were sort of off in the distance because they just couldn't wait around for the mother and the aunt to get this little baby elephant going. And eventually the baby elephant did go, but you could see the elephant pack getting further and further away. So the question was, dramatically in the text, are they going to leave this elephant behind? Will the auntie and the mother leave the elephant behind, the baby elephant behind? Anyway, I was using these stories at the time to make a point, and I was trying to frame, as I think I used to observe some of the elder speakers that I listened to in Sitka and Juneau, frame the topic by talking about the things that were germane to the topic, but not directly. It was very indirectly, and they didn't get it, of course. Not only did they not get it, they were really puzzled as to what I was trying to convey in terms of my point. And so, but one of them did at the end come by and talk to me, and he said, I really think I got what you were saying, and he explained to it. And so every once in a while, there are other people who have experience thinking in a different way, and there was one in a room of about 35, so that's not a bad odds. So place-based education is about thinking about the way we organize our lives in a way that's different from maybe the mainstream. Students in schools are so disconnected from who they are and what they learn in their households and what they are all about in their communities and in their regions, because most of the textbooks and most of the ways teachers are trained have very little to do with who they are and how they learn in their community. So to a large degree, place-based education is about connecting students in schools and everywhere else to the community. This is becoming more important as society becomes more complex, and as we find more and more ways to disconnect ourselves from who we are and where we're from. And so it's good that we're doing this, and that the timing is such that place-based education is catching on all over the country. One of the main players in the place-based education movement are the participants in the rural systemic initiatives throughout the country. And in Alaska, the Alaska Rural Systemic Initiative, I think, from all that I can gather from talking to a lot of people around the country, don't be offended if you're not from Alaska or that you were a participant in one of the other RSIs, but lots of people I talked to say that Alaska did it better. Okay, well. And what I mean by that is a lot of the processes that were in place, the way we organized our systemic initiative, Ray Barnhart and Frank Hill and others, Oscar Coagley, lots of you in the room participated in these processes, and they generated products and additional processes that are really all about place-based education, including GIS Cultural Atlas, resource mapping, digital storytelling to some extent, other things I'll talk about just very briefly. So we are at the forefront of what's being done around the country nationally in terms of this place-based education movement. Right now I'm directing the School Community Leadership Consortium at Antioch University, Seattle, and the School Community Leadership Consortium is all about trying to convince school districts and school administrators and teachers and parent committees and school leaders and community leaders and everyone involved in how our kids are educated that place-based education makes a lot of sense and we ought to be doing more of it. And there's a lot of things that we're trying to get started through this consortium, but I'll just touch on a few here shortly. A lot of this has to do with what teachers do in classrooms, and there are a lot of teachers who are working in Southeast Alaska and in Alaska who do this kind of naturally, or they haven't necessarily been trained in their teacher training programs very thoroughly to do this, but they understand that the best way to educate students is to connect those students to the community by having those students go out and talk to elders, talk to other community members to essentially become members of a larger school and a larger classroom, whereby the community is the classroom. One of the projects that I'm involved in addition to what I'll talk about in a minute, which is digital storytelling, is helping teachers to create with students maps that are like cultural resource atlases of a kind that have been done in Alaska and a few other states. And so the students gather a lot of data and they put it into various forms that reflect how they view it and how they see it as important and how they've learned those kinds of things from important people in the community, whether they're elders or others. So part of the problem I'm having when I'm doing this kind of work is getting education policymakers and funding agencies and people in power to understand that we're not training teachers to teach in a completely different way. We're training, we're not training teachers to create curriculum. We're training teachers to help students create curriculum. So the teacher becomes the guide to help the student create the curriculum. So what they want oftentimes when we go and do this is they want a curriculum. They want us to give them a place-based education curriculum, often in the form of a big binder with a bunch of little sort of tabs with different kinds of projects that the students can do. And no matter how many times I say it, I can't quite convey the point that it's the students who are gathering the information. It's the students that are putting it in the right form. What we do is we help the teachers match that with the academic standards that the state dictates or mandates or however you want to put it, and so that they're following all the rules and they're learning all the different things that they're supposed to learn, but they're doing it in the form of gathering information as they would in a traditional way and using place-based education processes, and then we'll match what they're doing to the academic standards that are a part of No Child Left Behind and other rules and regulations that school districts and states have us follow. This change in the way that we do business in education takes a lot of commitment, and that commitment comes in the form of reorganizing how you do schooling. Students need access to teachers, community members, and cultural resources. So in part it's an access issue. You can't just have students wandering the streets looking for people to interview or walking into the library asking librarians questions they oftentimes can't answer. You have to provide them a framework, you have to get them introductions, you have to give them the kind of help they need to have the kind of access they need. What do teachers need? They need time, they need support, and they need resources, because if you ask the average teacher or even the above average teacher or even the most excellent teacher, the thing that they most need is time. The thing that they least have is time, and to some extent time is money. So if you can pay them for release time, then often they'll have the time to work with people like me and others who can help them convert their existing curriculum or throw it out altogether and get a better one in place using the kinds of methods that you've been learning about the last couple of days. But that's a major challenge. That's a big step. It's something that schools aren't used to doing much of, especially throwing out an existing curriculum. It's often easier to go through a transition where you convert. But what do I mean by that? I mean teachers need to be able to go to workshops, whether they're summer workshops or not. They need academic year training, even as they're teaching their classes. And so how do you do that? How do you get them out of the classroom? You essentially pay them. You pay the districts to get substitutes, and you pay them to participate. And so part of what we're doing is raising money to do that. The other piece of this work has to do with administrators and parent organizations and community leaders. See, I've never quite been able to figure out what a community leader is. I've spent half my life trying to figure it out. But I think it's the people, just generally in a community who step up and help get things done. And so there's no title. They don't wear a badge. They don't have an official sort of designation. You can't tell them apart from anyone else until they stand up and they help you get something done. And thus they are suddenly a community leader. So those are among the kinds of people that we're trying to involve in this process. And part of the reason it's a heavy process is because once you begin to put in place a place-based education framework, suddenly a couple things happen. Your school schedule has to change, oftentimes. The way that a community would organize a school and the way kids learn is often far different from how schools are organized conventionally. The school day is changing. The length of a class might change. Where the students go might change. There may be no such thing as a classroom anymore, where you sit in front of a teacher and you're learning by lecture or other means. So there's lots of things that have to change, and so that takes power, right? That takes the kind of power that would move schools toward allowing for that kind of change and providing the resources to see it happen. But the other part of the problem is not that many schools are willing to do it. And so I've been advocating for us to have our own schools. And some people wonder why I'm advocating for us to have our own schools. And that's why. Sometimes it's easier to throw out the old school and just start over. I understand that's not realistic. I've been pounded enough to become somewhat of a realist over the years. But still, F.E. Cochran Charter School in Fairbanks is a good example of a school that has been started from scratch and has been started using place-based education principles. Take a look at their calendar. Take a look at their schedule. A colleague and I just did a project-based learning workshop for them about a month and a half ago. And so their pedagogy is changing. Hopefully they'll be doing a bunch of digital storytelling here in the next couple of years. And that's what it takes. So anyway, to make a short story longer, we're trying to put a lot of information together on the web so that people have examples of the kind of curriculum we're talking about and the kind of pedagogy. Pedagogy is the way you teach, the things you do, the way you organize yourselves, the way you think about teaching. And a good example of that is what I did when I did that UW lecture for that interview. That was a different pedagogy. Let me see. I guess I'll just talk for a minute and a half about the institutes that we're organizing for this coming summer. We have one in June, July, and August, and they are in Sitka, Juneau, and Seattle, respectively. And they're not just for teachers, they're for educators, community leaders, administrators, all those people I named who have the possibility of influencing how a school operates, functions, not just within the classroom, but within the community. So unfortunately, we didn't get a grant to run these, so we're having to charge a fee. I know. Sorry about that. But hopefully next year for 2008, we'll have a grant and we'll be able to fund people to participate. But right now, we're actually having them fund themselves. They will, I'll show you a link to the website here in a second, and then you can mark it down and go back to your communities, and if you're here in Sitka, go to the school district and tell them that they need to send teachers and educators and community leaders and whoever else to these institutes, because it's an introduction to place-based education of the kind that we've been talking about this week. In particular, we'll cover two things. One is two examples of place-based education. One is digital storytelling using software that's on every computer made these days, already on there, whether it's a Mac or an Apple. And essentially, that's training teachers how to work with students to create digital stories. And I definitely want to talk with Ish about making digital stories of the kinds of things he's doing with the Perseverance Theater. The other is the mapping project. So we're going to have teachers go through an introductory exposure to both of those things. In addition, we'll talk about place-based education processes, including some rubrics and some curriculum, the spiral curriculum platform that you've seen on the Alaska Native Knowledge Network, and that I won't show you at this point, but lots of goodies for teachers to begin to do the kinds of things that we know that they need to do, and also for folks who are maybe, if not in power, at least on the fringes of power, so that they can begin to convince folks in their districts that these kinds of changes need to be made. So the website, let me just skip through all this other juicy material about what a consortium does, because that's just basically advertising, and I'm not here to advertise. There it is. If you go to this website, as I could actually do right now if I wasn't so computer illiterate, you will find the site description for the summer institutes. You will find the registration form, the agenda, information about travel and meeting places. Oh, by the way, can't find a place to meet in Sitka. So if anyone here in my old hometown can help me figure out where we're going to meet in June 26th, 27th, and 28th, something like that, that would be appreciated. We also can't find dorm or hotel space that's at any kind of decent rate. So help. That's me and my brother walking down the street not far from here back in the day, speaking of place-based education. Let me just check to see if there's anything else that I was supposed to say that I didn't, because I'm so organized.
What are the dates in June?
Dates in Juneau. Let me just attempt to pull this up then. I'm gonna test. I have a better idea, Andy. As usual, I have a better idea here. There we go. Let me see. Okay. Juneau. Do you know where that information is? July 19th through 21st in Juneau. June 26th through 28th in Sitka, and in Seattle, August 9th through 11th. Ray Barnhart and I and my colleague Rob Wang are facilitating the workshops, but there'll be all kinds of other Jews besides us. Sitka, I think will fill up fastest, because who doesn't want to come to Sitka? I'm biased. We have about 12, I think, that we know are coming to Sitka. We only have a few coming to Juneau right now, including 3 from Montana, actually. So that's good. Seattle, we haven't even begun to recruit to, because we have more time to recruit to Seattle. But we're trying to limit it to 30 to 35. Right now it's wide open, because we haven't. The quarter just ended down where I work, and I'm not a full-time director. That's more of a title. I actually have to teach and do other things to make a living. So I've just begun to recruit heavily to these institutes, including this free plug. So lots of information on that site. Hopefully. Oh, sorry. We are going to do that. Yeah. There'll be graduate credit, and there'll be professional development credit. So each of the kinds of credit that most people look for, whether they're teachers or others, to fulfill their various requirements, we will have those. It hasn't been officially worked out, but now that I have time, I'm doing that. Okay, I'm done.
My name is Steve Langdon. I'm from the Department of Anthropology at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Andy and my educational intersection goes back 40 years. I mean, we're not approaching 80 yet, but it's truly astonishing that we've had a relationship through education for nearly 40 years. It's my pleasure to be here in a wonderfully entitled event, sharing our knowledge, opportunity to be with friends again, and the opportunity which I cherish a great deal to learn. And so sharing our knowledge is a wonderful title. Ted talked about an experience that he gave to some other educators, but he gave us a lecture. He didn't give us an experience. This is an experience. And this is what place-based education is about as an experience. This is a wonderful, as you can tell, it inspires awe and wonder. And this is what place-based education is really about. It's being in places where awe and wonder come from. And I can see everybody's minds locking on and saying, what is that? And I'd love to hear all the answers to what is that, because we don't know. It's one of those things that has drifted away, or it has been inundated, but it has recently returned. Recently returned by a discovery, by being in a landscape, being in a place. And this is one of the most exciting things to me about educating young people, is getting those experiences in place, letting them know that the landscape is alive. That the landscape is alive with the heritage, with their shagun. It's available for them to learn from and to bring forward the materials that they learn. This is in fact a petroglyph that's in association with a whole host of other petroglyphs, probably in excess of 20, in a very key location near a fish trap site in Hina, Tlingit territory on the outer coast of Prince of Wales Island. So I think it's a very moving example of how experience is truly at the foundation of what place-based education is in terms of me, in terms of my experiences. And I've had the good fortune for over 30 years to be taught by and informed by wonderful elders and others in Klawock and Craig. I've spent a lot of my time in that part of the world, and also wonderful times in the context of learning from the elders in Hunakau as well. So I'd like to express my acknowledgement and gunalchish to all of those people who accommodated me and were able to put up with me for a period of time. What I want to talk a little bit about today is a multiplicity of ways of bringing forward materials and integrating them into place-based education. Because my view of Tlingit in terms of the manner in which place names and places and experiences, they're really bound into our neurological system, our endorphin system. That is, when I first saw that particular piece, I got goosebumps, went up the back of my neck, okay? This is how these places are really grounded in our very, very tight emotions. And that's a part of why being in places brings out those experiences. And that's really what fixes them and bonds them into people, is those direct experiences. And I know we can hear many voices out there who can talk about their own personal experiences in that particular fashion when they go back there. So at any rate, I'd like to acknowledge the sources, one of which is an individual I never encountered, but he's a remarkable man named John Darrow, who's a Klawock-Gunahuddy, who recorded many place names and oral traditions associated with the Hina-Kwan territory back in the 1930s. And those are found now they're found in documents in the University of California, Berkeley, and a few of them are published in various places. So this is one place where we need to recognize where we need to go to be able to recover place-based information, is in these particular ancestral accounts. And of course, the Dauenhauers have been instrumental in bringing forth and re-eliciting that kind of information, and Andy's work with the Aquitatsine story to bring forward those materials, re-elicit them, and bring them in just like the petroglyph was brought into our experiences to bring those experiences forward. And these are also the contemporary Hina elders who contributed a great, enormous amount of information on place names. I was lucky enough to participate, fortunate enough to participate with Tom Thornton and Harold Martin in the place names project for the Hina-Kwan. And my co-investigator was John Rowan, who's the cultural educator and carver from Klawock. And John, could you stand up, please? I'd like to acknowledge John. He's done wonderful work. So these two are pretty extraordinary people, and we're going to see them in the context of some of the information that they provided here later on here shortly. There are other sources, the Hina, who also contribute to that particular project. This is the Hina Tlingit territory. It's actually now a combination of three separate Kwans, Kuyu Kwan, Tajik Kwan, and Hina Kwan are now combined as a result of movement and consolidation of populations due to disease loss in the village of Klawock, and also as a result of educational pressures. The people from the village of Tajikan moved to Klawock in the period around 1900. So we have a Hina GIS place names database that's derived from the project that Tom and Harold were talking about earlier. And that database provides information in various kinds: the place name spelling, the contemporary term, translation into English, and the source or the sources for the term. So we see the map like Tom had displayed before, and each of those individual places has a name and information associated with it. Now, there are many ways in which Tlingit and the materials that we're talking about can be pulled together by students. And I like Ted's, and I want to reinforce Ted's notion here of the students building the projects. There's lots of raw materials out there and lots of ways that students can combine and bring these things together and build, as an open system is, not a copyrighted system, but an open system by which you have general iterations and additions going forward. Some places have extraordinary kinds of information associated with them as they are woven through the tapestry of Tlingit culture. And it's much more than just multimedia. It's the actual creation of a knowledge nachain is the way in which these things I see being tied together. And I'm not going to talk about this one today. I'm talking about this special place called Dekinu during chat tomorrow in terms of how these work. But one of the things is that this is a location in the context of the raven cycle. And so it has a specific place name that appears in the context of the raven cycle. And so it stands as extraordinarily high in prominence in terms of the kinds of Tlingit places that people recognize. But in addition, it also functions, as number 2 indicates, is that it is a particular at'u. That is, it's associated with the Nastedi clan. The Nastedi clan included the very important leaders, the Paratovich families. Frank and Roy were members of this particular clan. And so that particular at'u associated with the stories is also replicated. Here's where Dekinu is located. Bert, this is where that island is that you were talking about yesterday, where Raven went to get the water. It's out here. And it's also called Hazy Islands in contemporary discussion. So in the Klawock Totem Park is at'u of the Nastedi clan associated with their use of that particular place. So here we're beginning to bring the dimensions of the place name and the at'u into the framework that the project allows. And this at'u demonstrates the particular relationships that the Nastedi people have to that landscape in terms of their collection of the muir eggs. And that's what the theme I'll be talking about tomorrow. There's also a second pole, the Spirit of the Hazy Islands pole, that is also associated with Nastedi at'u, that speaks to the tribulation of a man who lost his life on the islands. And this, of course, then represents one of the outstanding themes associated with at'u. And now there, in addition to that, there's other ways. We have historic photos from many of our traditional villages. Angoon, of course, has their own wonderful project associated with the tribal houses, linking those to place names. We don't have quite that kind of analytical information, but we can build together a package of a project associated with the place name. Photos that, again, first of all, the GIS map that demonstrates the location of this particular site. And then this particular photograph I discovered about 15 years ago, serendipitously, in an archive up at my university. And this is the oldest known photograph from the 1880s of the traditional village of Tajikan, from which many of Cloak's people and clans are descendant. Then we can move inside and see the association of this particular structure to some of the clans that are in fact continue to function in the community of Cloak. This particular design appears on dance blankets that children, young people actually dance with at various different ceremonies. And this is a raven dog salmon crest house front painting. And of course, this kind of thing opens up lots of opportunities for students to look in much greater detail at all of the kinds of ramifications of in a photo like this, which can be a part of place-based education as well. But it feeds into an understanding of the template of existence. How did people's minds function, work, and create with the ideas? So all across this particular materials, linked to place are opportunities for bringing forward other kinds of lessons and information. In addition, of course, Tajikan is the location of the greatest collection of Tlingit poles at any time. Some of those poles you can go out here to the Sitka National Monument and find replicas of those poles, because the Hinya elders allowed them to be taken by Governor Brady in 1904, and so they have traveled in long places. John uses these kinds of photos to assist in training young students, and he uses it for its own eye. And there's lots of educational information on historic changes in terms of various different kinds of totemic utilization in the art that can be revealed in this fashion. So another important place is to talk about some places are, shall we say, historic, in the sense that they came into existence as the result of changes after some of our European inundations into the region. And for example, amongst the Hinya, there's this extraordinary place called Hole in the Wall, Nakweto. And so this place came into existence as a result of the it was previously a seasonal camp associated with a specific clan, but then as a result of population relocation and the development of the salmon trolling economy, this particular village became an extraordinary community site for the village of Cloak. They began a wholesale movement to this particular site and built seasonal camps out there. And in fact, this barge was bringing out the stores. So the two families, not moieties, the two families that very large families from Cloak Pratoviches and the Demerts brought their stores out to this particular site. This site can be returned to, and they're living individuals who can document all of those house locations, and it provides an opportunity for students to build in this particular fashion. Now, there are some places where we don't have a direct linkage to underlying cultural practices as a result of the loss of population, but we do have a place name. And I'll take Harold's advice and not attempt to pronounce this particular place name. Maybe he'd like to do it for me, but that's all right. In this particular place, we have an interesting intersection of a place name, but no information other than that there was a resident population that died off. But we were able, through ethnoarchaeological and research in this particular place, to learn a great deal more out of it. The name actually is translated as Little Anus Lake. So I won't say it's Tlingit name, but that's how it's translated. This is an aerial photo that gives us some very interesting information. We have two streams coming together, and they are joined here. We're We're seeing it about half tide, and there's lots of interesting information that this aerial photo reveals about some underlying Tlingit practices here. Now this is a different aerial shot from straight overhead, and I'll say briefly something about why it's called the name that it is. This location that the arrow points to is the only tidal entrance into this particular location. I've always been struck by, in this aerial photo, its correspondence to certain aspects of general sort of mammalian physiology, if you might say, what's going on here. So having passed through that very, very narrow passageway, about 30 feet wide, on the egress tide, let me just say that it's a very explosive and kind of event that occurs. So now we understand why our Tlingit ancestors used this particular terminology for this particular place. But inside this wonderfully protected location are an enormous array of evidences about previous uses. This particular bay, the green lines and the white dots that you see here are what we have mapped in terms of the ancient fish weirs that the Hina ancestors built in this particular bay. And our radiocarbon dates from the wood indicate that it was been used for over 2,000 years, from 2,300 years ago down to around 350 years ago. I'm publishing an article hopefully next year, talks about the changes in the technologies that we can see here. This, just as a footnote, oftentimes people treat the past as if the people they encountered had never changed over 2,000 years, and they don't grant credit to technical innovations that reduce labor, technical innovations that sustain salmon resources, and technical innovations that also enhance. So this kind of research, when students are in place, can begin to see the actual intellectual development in the building of these particular knowledge bases and technical bases through time. And it's really exciting to be able to do that. Here are several of my elder consultants, Theodore Roberts on the left and Bill Woods on the right. They're pointing to the remnant wood stakes in Little Salt Lake. And on the right-hand side, what you see is just a configuration of where these stakes form a very, very long weir that runs down to and intersects one of the streams. And the secondary stakes here in front are showing how there is then a trap system that the fish were diverted into as they came in on the incoming tide. And this particular set of structures is about 1,500 years old. So this is a very, very old pattern. What we did here in our research is we flagged all of those stakes. And there's somewhere in excess of 4,000 individual stakes. When you pull them out and you look at the opposite end, they're all carved. I don't mean to offend anybody, but I think this is the origins of the Tlingit slave economy when I saw all of these particular pointed edges on top of them. This is the kind of information that makes an extraordinary place-based experience of the past kind of experiences. Now in other places we have very good information on actual experiences. Nobody alive had ever used those systems. We're going to go now to another place and look at what we refer to as ethno-archaeological. Here we don't have a place name, but instead we have actual experiential knowledge. We have not yet recovered the place name for this location, so that's why it has this Spanish name associated with it. These interlopers showed up around 1779 and began naming everything. So not everything is English names. In this place there's a lot of Spanish names as well. Here in this aerial photo, the arrow is pointing to what will go down on the ground here in a moment. See, and this is what I refer to as a bilobed. It means it has two lobes. It's an intertidal semicircular stone trap. And I never thought that there'd anybody who'd actually used these, and I thought they were like the other traps, but we're going to see in a moment that that's not the case. This is when we're down on the landscape, sitting at the beach line, we can see some of the features of this particular structure, and there's also some other things that I don't have time to talk about in terms of what's going on in this place.
I'm from Juneau. I'm Duckdane Ton Snail House from Huna. My mother and father are William and Irene Lampe. My grandparents were Juan and Mary Sarabia. I have a heritage that is very rich. It's from all over the world. I am Tlingit, but I'm also German Jew, Norwegian, Finnish, as well as Filipino, Japanese, Malaysian. A little bit of Tibetan on the side here. I'm really honored to be here. I've never done much public speaking, but I've done a lot of theater with Nakahiti Theater, and we have a lot of Nakahiti Theater members here. I just want to acknowledge the producers, Andy, Peter Metcalf out there, Steve and Janny, Robbie Littlefield, all of these people who have put this together. I think this is a fabulous conference. I've never been to anything quite like this. It's always been in the arts-related field because I'm a visual artist, a performing artist, but I've never come out and spoken, in public about stuff. I just want to say that I was really impressed that all of you were here at 8 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I didn't expect anybody here till about 9 or 10. And it was kind of intimidating. Anyways, I just want to acknowledge all of the people who feel so compelled and are committed and dedicated to the preservation and the continuance of the various aspects of our culture here in Southeast Alaska. It's great to be home. I'm reestablishing my residency, and I'm all excited about it. This is my 4th day in Alaska, knowing that I'm going to be settling back here again. I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about. There were a lot of various things that I could talk about, and I decided that I would wait until the various speakers got up and spoke, and then I would figure out from that what I wanted to say. Now, when Hans got up and spoke about the name of this place that Steve had portrayed here, I was very inspired by that. I was inspired by the food, the gathering of the food from the land and the sea. And I decided that I would go into speaking about the matter being matter and spirit being spirit, meaning to me that what is on the surface may change, but the spirit of a landscape will always remain no matter what happens on the surface of the earth, no matter what nature does, or no matter what mankind does to the earth. Spirit is spirit, and it continues to be that. And I think all of us know that. And one of the ways that I want to give an example of that is this. By way of being a chilkat weaver, and many of you who are beginner weavers, and I have several students out here who are beginner weavers and intermediate weavers. As a chilkat weaver, it is one of the most powerful art forms, and I don't know how to explain it to all the rest of the artists who are carvers and basket weavers and printmakers. With chilkat weaving, you bring the animal, you bring something from an animal and something from a plant, and you bring it together and you create. This is what we create. We create a second skin. And that skin that we put on, those prestigious robes that we get to wear, some of us don't have the privilege of doing that yet. The power of a chilkat robe is like no other. And it's been an honor to weave them. And when, as a weaver, we were taught, and I was taught by Jenny Clinot, one of the last of the weavers, right up there next to Maria Ackerman Miller. And She said that not just anybody could weave a robe. This is not just for anyone. And I never understood that because, I come from all kinds of backgrounds and I'm pretty friendly with just about anybody out there. I didn't want to just keep it to myself, and yet I didn't understand why she was so adamant about making sure that it was only the Native women, not the Native men. The men could do all other aspects of supporting Chilkat weaving, but could not weave. The Native women were given this honor, this task. The Native women of the Southeast Alaska into British Columbia, down into Washington State. Why is it that the Native women are the only ones who were given this right? Well, as the years went on, I honored her. I decided, okay, if I'm going to teach Chilkat weaving, and that's what she wanted me to do, if I'm going to teach Chilkat weaving to people, to only Native women, then I will do that. I will follow through with what she requested of me. And I will see why that is. I want to find out why that was. Because as an elder, and most of us know this, when you ask the question, why do we use the blue? Or why is it that we carve like this? Or how come? The elder will always say, this is the way it's done. This is how it goes. There is no, they don't give us a definite explanation of why. Not like in the Western terms, you ask a question and there's always these levels of definitions. So in 20 years of teaching the Chilkat weaving to beginner weavers, I have discovered, and in weaving robes myself, I have discovered that there's a certain essence of Chilkat weaving that is not available, not really part of the rest of the art forms that we do, whether it be subsistence, whether it be carving, basketry, and I don't know how to explain it in any other way except those who know how to weave Chilkat, in the sense of those who are experienced at it, especially the ones who've woven robes, will understand that there is an essence there, a very strong essence that's tied to the land, and beyond that, the spirit of this place. And so when Hans brings up the description of the native name of a place, what's the big deal? What is the big deal? Well, we can continue to call it whatever that name is, and we can continue to call it what we think it is, or give it a new name. The interesting thing is what spirit is spirit and matter is matter, and that we, as human beings, cannot change, and we don't have the power to change the spiritual aspect of a place. And with Chilkat weaving, I have discovered that it's important to take my time, and it's very precious, to teach the native women of this place, because they are connected by ancestral ties and spiritual ties to the land. They are the receptors. They are the physical embodiment of a landscape of this spiritual aspect of our country here. And there is information that is given in Chilkat weaving that is not necessarily provided for. It's very unique in that art form. One of the things that Jenny said before she passed away, I learned from her as an apprentice directly before she passed away, a couple of months later. She told me that if I ever if I need her in any way in regards to Chilkat weaving or anything else for that matter, she said, just call on me, and I'll be right there. Now, at that time, I was about 29 years old, and I didn't really know much about our culture or ways of doing things and stuff like that. And I thought, what? She's going to come back from the dead or somehow going to convey information to me. How is that possible? Well, it was very interesting because she told me all these various things, and I don't have time to get into any of them. There are some of them that I put in my Chilkat Weaving Handbook, some of the stories, some of the techniques, and things like that. I would come across various difficult times in my life in regards to my own personal life, but also Chilkat weaving techniques and teachings. And I would forget how to do something, or there were things that she taught me that I forgot that I was supposed to do. And I totally spaced it out on it until the certain things happened. And her voice came in loud and clear. It always comes in on my right. And it's amazing how she can cross time and space. And I know that some of my other students have experienced that. And I know that some of the students of Jenny in the workshop in 1985 have experienced it. Something will happen. She'll come in right away and said, "What did I tell you about prayer?" In an incident where I was just totally astounded. Or, "What did I tell you about being good to your husband?" Or, "You go take time out to eat right now." And it's this amazing thing. Well, because we don't have much time, and I know that the Dauenhauers are going to be on here pretty soon. Agnes Bellinger, who is her daughter, I had the privilege of spending one of the last months with Agnes before she passed away in San Diego, trying to clear out the cancer out of her body. Agnes told me the story, and when she got done telling me the story, I couldn't believe it. It was almost exactly something that happened directly with me, with another person. And I got to read you the story. I would act it out, but anyways, this one was a story that Agnes told me while we were in San Diego. And she just happened to be talking about her mom. She talked about a lot of things, and I wish I could convey that to you guys here, and I would, but I don't have the time. I call it the invisible thunderbolt. Her story is shoe fly, but mine is the invisible thunderbolt. Okay, when Jenny passed away in 1986, Agnes said that a couple of months later, her and her sister Edna were going through all of Jenny's things. And Agnes said that they weren't allowed to cry. They were told they were not allowed to cry after Jenny passed away. She said, "I don't want you to cry after me. You're not going to keep me from going to the other side. I have a journey to make. I'll be back, but I have a journey to make." And so Agnes said she and her sister did not cry, not even at the funeral, memorial service, 40-day party, no tears. But 2 months later, after Jenny passed away, Agnes said that they were going through this stuff, and they came across this pair of purple paisley pants that belonged to their mom. They hadn't seen it for a good 20 years. Both sisters grabbed one pair, one side of the leg, and they hung on to it like this, and Agnes started to cry. Why? Because 20 years prior, they had hid that purple pair of pants that was Jenny's favorite. They thought it was a pair of ugliest pair of pants they had ever seen. So they kept it from their mom. So their mom, for many years, asked, "Have you girls seen my favorite purple pair of pants?" And they would reply, no, Mom. No, we haven't seen it. So here they discover this pair of pants, and they both started to cry. Agnes said they just grabbed onto the pant leg like this and just sobbed. As soon as they started sobbing, pew! Out of the middle of nowhere came this shoe, one of Jenny's shoes, flying through the air, hit the pair, grabbed that pair of pants and took it over to the side on the floor. Edna, right away, she turns to Agnes, "It's your fault." Well, I had this similar experience. It was just a few years ago. I was standing in a gallery, and I was admiring a Chilkat woven, small Chilkat woven regalia on a doll. And the gallery owner came over and said, "So, yeah, you're looking at that doll, eh? You like that?" And I says, "Yeah, I think it's a pretty good job." And she says, "Yeah, I hear you're in town for a while teaching a class." Yeah, And the gallery owner says, "Well, so I hear you don't teach men." And I said, "Well, yeah, that's right." And she says, "Why is that? We've known you for years, Clarissa. Well, you got something against men?" "No, I don't." And she says, "Well, then what's the deal?" And I said, well, just to make a long story short, it's because I'm honoring a request made by my teacher. And she says, "Oh, Jenny Clenat?" And I said, "Yeah, Jenny." And she goes, "Oh, come on, this is modern day." She says, "You can teach men. What difference does it make? Jenny's dead." Oh my God, as soon as she said Jenny was dead, Jenny's dead, we were standing shoulder to shoulder, just like this. All of a sudden, it was like this invisible thunderbolt just hit the ground between us, and we both just jumped back. Our eyes got big. We backed away from each other, and we looked around the gallery. I mean, it wasn't just my imagination. And it was a very humbling experience for both of us, and a reminder to me. Ever since that happened, the gallery owner, when we see each other, we just kind of bow. Yeah, yep. Because we know the power. We acknowledge the unseen, we experienced it. And there are some things that we cannot explain. And so, there we go. Matter is matter, spirit is spirit. Thank you.
We're going to cut this extremely short because I know we're going into the lunch period and we don't want to cut into Walter's. But, for my part, I'd like to just connect a few dots with what Andy and the others did, and then Nora will have a few personal comments. I'd like to first repeat something that was said yesterday, but again, we were running late and it was kind of chaotic. When Chancellor Pugh announced the Alaska Native funds at the University of Alaska Southeast. There are 3 funds. The most recent that we just started was the Emma Marks Memorial for Alaska Native Languages. There's also one for Native Oratory Support, and then the Selena Peratrovich Memorial Scholarship for Native Arts. And I mention this because the reason we did this, we found that there's a lot of support money for at-risk students, for beginning students. As students go through the system and get to the top, there's almost nothing. And most of our most advanced students, all of the ones you saw yesterday, they're in the back, Jessica, Hans, Mary, Lance, Twitchell, all of these people were not qualified for any other funding support because they were so close to graduation, they were only taking one course. We said, this is outrageous. That the students that are the most accomplished are getting the least amount of support. So we wanted to start that fund so that we will build an endowment so that we can get support to support our students who are doing the teaching, also in distance delivery sites so that we can extend the network for mentor-apprentice. So I just, again, call this to your attention, and you can make donations to this in the name of your relatives, your deceased, and hopefully this will build up an endowment so that we'll have the scholarship money for that. So I would like to say just a few things. Going back now, and this morning when Andy had the stuff on from the website, the Alaska Native Knowledge website, there are two things he wanted Nora and me to talk about. One was what we call the Handle Curriculum, and the other was the Salmon Curriculum. I'll talk a little bit about where we came up with the title Axe Handle in a minute, but the first thing that a bunch of us were sitting around saying, what's happening to the kids? There was a major outbreak of suicide, teen suicide, back in the 80s, and kids in the villages were killing themselves, and we were saying to ourselves, we're doing these books, they're sitting on the shelf, they're gathering dust. Somehow we've got to get this into the lives of people, otherwise it's a bunch of baloney. I mean, why we talk about literature, we talk about the stories, but if it doesn't mean anything to us, this is nothing. And so we thought of a way of doing this is to say, does great literature have anything to say to us? And by great literature, we also include the native traditions, the indigenous traditions from around the world. And so we had two strategies. One was this one that I mentioned, to try and get off the bookshelves into the lives of people. And the other was a strategy for getting it into school, because and we'll talk more about this tonight in our dinner address about recognizing Alaska Native literature. But one way of doing this was through what we call thematic comparative literature, where you take themes. And so we took some of these themes, like conflict of loyalty, and this appears in a lot of Tlingit stories, like the Glacier Bay story, pride and arrogance, the strongman story that Ishmael mentioned, self-concept, identity, who am I, the Tom Peters from Tesla and the woman who married the bear, just marvelous stories. So it was a lot easier to say, wherever we do the language arts curriculum, we could take these kinds of themes and plug in Tlingit literature, and it's not for doing a whole semester, it's when we're doing a Huckleberry Finn, we can also do the Glacier Bay history, and so that was the strategy behind that. And trying to do like what Ishmael did with the strongman story, is that it's not just about somebody that happened back in myth or legend time. This is kids playing basketball today. These are the kids that are on the streets that are having to deal with drugs. These are the kids that are having to deal with suicide. Who am I? Is there any meaning to my life? And so on. And so trying to somehow bring these stories home. Two other components of this curriculum, place-based obvious, that's the last two themes that we talked about with Tom and Steve's. And so beginning with the stories from your place, and also technologically that you are in the center of the world with all of this technology. And so part of it was trying to use modern technology, and you saw that yesterday with our students using PowerPoint, and Lance Twitchell, who's not here but was with the Macbeth, has his own website. So anyhow, all of these things deal with that. I'd like to mention a couple just briefly. Bert Adams yesterday of the Raven stories and the places around the Elsac River. I mean, these are great. I mean, you can say, here's where Raven did this, here's the beach. For Sitka, we have two marvelous examples. We'll talk this afternoon about the battles of Sitka. This is living history. It's right here. One that we were very impressed with, that Nora and I just piggybacked on, what Tom Thornton was doing with Ethel McKinnon and Robbie Craig and the Sitka tribe. The story of Akwtatsin, Marvelous story, and it has all of these place names. So again, this is Sitka based, and we don't have time to go into this now, but just these, we didn't know half of the place names. We couldn't figure them out. And it turns out because they were from the salmon point of view. We had the human point of view was above water, the salmon point of view was underwater, and all of a sudden you're called on to look at the world through the salmon migrating up through. And so what could be more place-based than this particular? So, and that ties in with another thing that Andy had. The big resistance that we've had to using native language and literature in the schools is people talk about, oh, we've got the state standards to meet. We can't possibly do the story of Akwtatsin because we're dealing with state standards. Well, no, you can do that, and that's the other thing that Andy asked us to talk about with the salmon curriculum. We took the Akwtatsin story and we went through it episode by episode, and we have a chart, and we go across the top with all of the state standards and how you can use these to match those state standards. So you don't have to just teach Western literature. You can teach Tlingit literature. There are ways of meeting these standards. A marvelous example that Andy showed this morning of the basket project. This is geometry. I mean, the Tlingit weavers, when you look at those baskets, this is unbelievable mastery of geometry, and we can get the kids doing this with computer programs like Logo and writing programs for design and these concepts of angles and shapes and repetition. So there are ways of teaching math. Ron Dick here out in the Dog Point camp for years have been doing this place-based science, getting kids involved in science. You don't need a big lab. You can just go to the beach and do your science projects. So lots of stuff like that. Finally, the reason we called it the Axe Handle Curriculum, this comes from a poem by Gary Snyder that he ripped off from, I think, Confucius. So it's an ancient Chinese poem that when you are making an axe handle, the model is never far away. So you've got one in your hand and you're kind of modeling this. And this is a metaphor for the teacher as model, that your students are going to teach and learn the way that you taught and learned. So if you're there saying, hey, we don't have all the answers here, but I think we can figure them out, and here's how we do it, that you're engendering a lifelong desire for learning, and that the resources are right there, so that we as teachers then become the models for learning. And so that was our curriculum. So we do have the Axe Handle curriculum on the website. We also have a place called the Axe Handle Academy, and people say, well, where is it? Well, we say, it's not a place, it's sort of a state of mind. So it's all diffused out here. So anyhow, that's my comments. Other than one more thing, with us doing this locally place-based curriculum, we also got linking the kids up, like all of the North Pacific salmon. So from the Seattle area on across to Russia and Japan, kids could do their own science, talk about salmon, do their write-ups, get on the internet, link up with kids in Japan and other places. And they're just very exciting things, so that you can be, wherever you are in the center of the world. You sometimes we think we're off in some backwater someplace in New York City is the center of the world. Well, they got it all wrong. I mean, people west of the Hudson River don't understand that, but you're where it is. So that's I just wanted to connect a few dots, and Nora will say a couple of things, and then we'll pass over to lunch and Walter's story.
My place-based education, and is, as a family, we were living on a boat. That's my place-based education. And New Annie, how many of you knew Annie? There's a lot of people knew Annie. Anyway, that's where my place-based education was. There were the men who hunted for our livelihood, the women who processed the kill for food. They were also the artists who did beadwork, basketry, made moccasins. Roots and grass were gathered for decoration. The men helped with smoking fish and meat. The men helped to build smokehouses and made a place for rendering grease for our dry fish. The older people were responsible for giving us names and telling us stories and educating us on how to live, what to do, and how to tell the weather, how to tell the tide, etc. We have to know all this to be on a boat, where the dangerous places were the rocks and all that, and where to anchor on what kind of weather. Men did all the fishing, and so did the women. There was no division of work like most people say. The women were responsible for raising children also, and so were the men. They did educating the young people, the young boys, and so it was everybody's job to be living. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
We have a couple guests from Washington, D.C., I think. Lady wanted to introduce them. Friends from National Geographic magazine. Are they here?
Introduce them. Yes. Good afternoon. Just another few minutes before the lunch break. I'm Kajint, Loretta Walton King from Sitka. My father is Gunahin, my mother Lara Walton, and my grandparents Rudolph and Mary Walton. And I wanted to introduce to you some friends who have, I think, something more to offer us that goes right along with the theme of the conference, that of learning together, that of looking at education, and sharing our knowledge. Part of this came about as some of the travels that I was able to take. I was away from Sitka for many, many years, but my travels took me to Africa, to the Americas, from north to south, to Australasia, the South Pacific, and into Siberia. And I liked to meet with the indigenous peoples as I traveled. One of the things that I found was that they're very much, as has been expressed here, like us. They're interested in the family. They're interested in looking after the education of the children. They want to carry on their culture. They honor the respect of elders. And in looking at what we might be able to do as a people and thinking about this conference, what came to mind was an opportunity to see a video that probably many of you have seen. It was produced by National Geographic, named The Journey of Man. And what that journey did was to take a look at the deep, deep ancestry of people and to see what the migration patterns were. So it took us on a journey to look at where did we come from? who were our ancestors before we came through the ice or across the water. And so many of the experiences that were mentioned by Dr. Spencer Wells was like listening to what our grandparents had told us, what we felt as a people. My cousin, who many of you know, and who I think her heart is just so saddened because of her health that she's not able to be here, Dr. Joyce Shales, was with me. We went to hear a lecture when Dr. Spencer Wells spoke in Seattle about this whole project. And so what we're trying to do is not say what the whole project is. It's like these magnificent presentations where it's like a touch and you want to hear more and more, but we know time has to move on. So what we've asked, when we spoke with Dr. Wells at the lecture, we said, we're going to a conference. It has these goals, and we wish that we could share the knowledge of what you're finding with deep ancestry. And in response, National Geographic, in a whim like this, sent for our consideration, just as a part of the program, if it would work in, because they follow very much what we hold valuable. And that's talking with the people to see if in learning together we can come to some deeper knowledge of things. And so today, there are two speakers and they're going to be very brief, but just to give you an idea, and then there's little information set up in the room where the exhibits are. The first will be Glennis Spring, who in the work for National Geographic works with education, so it's a beautiful natural part of what we're doing. And Jason Lucesmith works with the projects of DNA and deep ancestry. And his work and those of his colleagues take him around the world. So I am very happy that the presenters felt that we could offer this brief opportunity for them to just share some of this, and then we'll have the opportunity to talk in smaller groups and continue to learn together. Gunalakshish.
Thank you. Thank you, Loretta and Steve and all the conference organizers for allowing us to speak with you all about our project, the Geneographic Project. We're here on an invitation from Loretta and her sister, as she said, who heard Dr. Spencer Wells in Seattle give a public presentation on the project. And as some of you may know from watching the documentary Journey of Man, what we're trying to do is understand who we are and where we came from, and how did we populate the planet. We're doing this through a number of different ways, and we're finding some very exciting new stories and that allow us to search our deep ancestry, something that I've heard over the course of the past couple of days is important, very important to this community. I'm especially honored to be speaking today to a group of educators because education is a crucial part of National Geographic's mission. And we hope that you are able to take advantage of some of our resources that are available. The other thing I would like to highlight, and Jason can talk to you a little more about it, is the Legacy Fund. We have set up a Legacy Fund that provides grants for preservation of Indigenous and traditional cultures. It's all based directly from the community itself, and we seek your help and advice in identifying the projects that you think fits what needs to be accomplished. So again, a thank you to Loretta and to Steve and to all the conference organizers for letting us come here. And we will be in the back room if you have any questions about the project. Jason?
Make it quick.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd also like to echo thanks to Loretta and her cousin Joyce and everybody that we've met so far who's been so warm. I think I share the joy of having a microphone in my hand and speaking with a lot of other people here, so it'll be a challenge to be quick. I'm originally from San Francisco and now live in Washington, D.C., and this is my first time in Alaska, and it is a beautiful place, and thank you again to all of you for having us up here to meet such wonderful custodians and caretakers of this land has been a treat. The last 2 days has been a huge learning process for myself, and one of the things that I've learned that I've been really excited about is the concept of genealogy and how important that is to the communities here. Every lecturer and presenter that I've heard has talked about the use of genealogy to understand the connections within the clans and within the houses, and as a way of understanding how that advises you to your own history. And that gets me excited because that's really within the same framework that a lot of our work lies. Although rather than looking at recent genealogy, we look at deep genealogy, or what we call deep ancestry. I think most of us could certainly say something about where our grandparents or great-grandparents came from, and some of us could say something about where their grandparents came from. I think yesterday the head of the killer whale hunts the seal, if I pronounced that properly, said that he could retrace his family genealogy 300 years, maybe 400 years, and that's amazing to me. But if we go back far enough, we start to lose some of that resolution. And when that happens, we look at other pieces of information, like the name of a river, or the name of a mountain, or our song lines, or our oral histories, to advise us on the origins of our ancestors. And what our research does is it takes that context and it adds a new tool, DNA, to tell us, for example, how people in Southeast are related to the Yakutsk in the far east of Siberia, and when those populations might have diversified. Sorry if I mispronounced that name. So I'll be brief, but basically that's a very top level of our research, and we do have a booth set up in the back to talk more specifics about how the project's organized and maybe some of the science and some of the places that we've been over the last 2 years. Glennis did mention the Legacy Fund, which we've created to provide tangible benefits back to the communities in projects that you deem are valuable to your own preservation and advancement. And it's basically up to us to come up with solutions as you guys deem fit. So please speak with us, but I just want to say that's available, and we are really here to help answer questions and to continue the dialogue and, to help support Loretta and Joyce and learn from you guys. So thank you for having us again, and thank you for making time.